I want to tell you the story of Abba Antonius. Abba Antonius was one of the desert fathers and mothers. Quick history lesson, 3rd century Egypt. It's a group of men and women who sold everything they owned and moved out into the desert to find God and to fight sin within their heart. Through, I guess around 100 years, we had thousands of men and women who did this. It sounds rather crazy, but they were in good company. Jesus, Moses, John the Baptist, they all went into the desert to find God. And what we had was really the beginning of monastic movements. These men and women moving out into the desert. What we have from them is a collection of rather bizarre and sometimes strange stories. But I'm quite a fan of them. Let me share one of my favorites with you, and that's the story of Abba Antonius. Abba Antonius lived in a cave. He owned a mat and a bowl and a book. He had an entire Old and New Testament. Now, of course, this is before the printing press, so this book was handwritten. Entire Old and New Testament. One day a monk came to visit Abba Antonius, and Abba Antonius welcomed him in, gave him a place to stay, gave him a piece of bread. In the middle of the night, the monk arose, saw Abba Antonius' book, took the book, stole it. Next day, the monk went into the nearby town, went to a local bookseller to inquire about selling the book. Bookseller said, "That's a fine book. I'd very much like to purchase it. Let me inquire of its value. Return tomorrow." Bookseller took the book to the only person he knew who knew anything about books. Abba Antonius. Abba Antonius saw the book and he smiled. "Well, that's a fine book. You should purchase it. It's worth at least 20 pence. At least that's the way the translation reads. Bookseller returned the next day to the monk and said, "I would like to purchase this book. I took it to Abba Antonius. He said, it's a fine book and I should buy it." The monk, alarmed, shocked, stunned. "You took the book to Abba Antonius? What did he say? What did he do?" He said, "It's a fine book and I should buy it." The monk grabbed the book, ran away, ran and fell outside the cave of Abba Antonius. And there he lay prostrate. "Abba, Abba, I'm so sorry. Oh, Abba, Abba, forgive me." And Abba Antonius just smiled, reached out his hand. "Go in peace, brother. The book is a gift." At least the way the story goes, that the monk was so moved by Abba Antonius' grace and forgiveness that he spent the rest of his days living, learning from Abba Antonius. It's a good story. I like it. Sounds a little like the prodigal son. Good story of grace, forgiveness. Sounds a lot like Les Mis. In our own ways, we know what it's like to be the monk. We know what it's like to feel sorry, to be repentant. And that's often where we enter into the Christian life. But I'm not so interested in the monk. I'm interested in Abba Antonius. How do you become the type of person that when your most valuable possession is stolen, your natural reaction is that of grace and mercy? He didn't have to stop and tell himself to be loving. He didn't have to make himself do anything. It flowed naturally out of his life. That's what I'm interested in. How do we become well-formed people so that we are able to respond to life naturally as Jesus would if he were to live our lives with our jobs, our school, our roommates, and our parents, all the spaces we find ourselves in, the good ones and the messy ones. How do we respond well? That's what I'm interested in. So essentially today we're talking about spiritual formation. Spiritual formation, very simply, is how we grow spiritually. What are the means and mechanisms that God uses to help us grow up? Become people, well-formed people. People like Abba and Tanais. There's much to say on this topic. And earlier today I spoke a little bit about our narratives of God and how that is absolutely critical when we enter into the spiritual life. Think about the spiritual life as something that you train for. Please do not try harder. I mean, many of you are so beaten up and so burdened with trying to be good Christians and trying to do things for God. It's cute in a way, it's sweet, but it's not necessarily helpful. We enter into small, easy, baby steps, training. If you want to run a marathon, you don't just walk out the door and go at it. You train. You take your time. You start with a half a mile. And maybe the next week you run a mile, little by little. And then you find this grace that happens. After 6 months of training, suddenly the 26.2 miles is somehow doable. And it becomes a grace. The spiritual life is just like that. It's training. So we show up in our little ways. We offer what we can in little ways. And then God does something with that. And that is grace. The ways and means of grace. Now, our little efforts, that over time we become well-formed people to where fruit naturally flows out of our life. You cannot force fruit to grow. It takes time, and sometimes a lot of time. 1978, my father wrote a book, Celebration of Discipline. It's a good book. It's sold like 25 million, or 20 million, 2 million copies. Yeah, just let that title get through you. 25 different languages, that's where I was going. And essentially in that book, he outlines 12 classic spiritual disciplines. Things that that Christians have been doing all through the ages. Essentially, they're comprised of from the life of Jesus. It is, if you want to live like Jesus, then we do the practices Jesus did. That's really quite simple. So things like prayer, meditation, fasting, study, service, submission, confession, solitude, celebration, simplicity. Well, I think I got it. At any rate, that's what he wrote about. And real quick, just to tell you what I did with that, President Allison read from my book. Essentially what I did with that was I took these 12 ancient spiritual practices and attempted to spend a year practicing each of them intensely and intentionally, and then wrote a narrative of my journey, successes, failures, what worked and what didn't work. I learned a lot of things in doing that. That one-year journey turned into 4. Oh, and it really hasn't stopped. It's really continued on. So today what I'd like to do is just share a few ways that I learned to practice spiritual disciplines, particularly in the midst of everyday, ordinary life. So when I started the project, I was quite ambitious, and I thought, I'm going to take these disciplines, and I'm going to go serious, I'm going to go hardcore on them, and I'm going to do all these cool little stunts. You know, things like solitude, I'm going to lock myself up in a room for 3 days and pray. Or, something silly like this. Worship, me and the kids and my wife were packing up going to Kansas City, 24-hour-a-day worship. And we're just going to hang out and do, I'm going to be all silly with it. And it was really, really interesting. Because before I ever had an opportunity to do any of my stunts, the disciplines found me. So as soon as I began to turn my attention to, let's say, the discipline of submission. Submission is a wonderful discipline and one that's been sorely abused. But in its kind of purity, it's essentially letting go of my chronic desire to have my own way. And submitting to God, to another person, to a situation. And I turn my attention, all right, submission. Now, what's the stuff I'm going to do for this, you know? And lo and behold, little opportunities found me. And for that one in particular, it was riding my bike in the wind. And through that, I learned about submission. And then I had this experience of submitting to my children for a day. That's how I practiced that one. Everyday, ordinary life, the disciplines found me. Now, I say that to you for a couple of reasons. One, to encourage you to take your time, to be easy with it. And that my hope is that you'll be here today not with burdens, not with a spiritual to-do list, but with an invitation to enter into life with God. My hope is that you'll begin to think about different activities, different ways that you can present your body before God, ways that you can train to become a person like Abba and Ananias. But here's what I'd say. Rest easy with it. Sit for a week or two and see what percolates. See what comes up. See what finds you. Well, in one sense, the disciplines, they found me. And the book turned out much different than I had anticipated. A little bit to the chagrin of my publisher. They were counting on those stunts. I said God had something else in mind for me. I learned service by washing dishes. Like Brother Lawrence. I'm the Lord of all pots and pans. So a couple of... Well, essentially with the disciplines, what we're doing is taking the only thing we have any control over, this very moment. Because I can't control the past. However hard I try, however much I want to control, change the past, it's done. It's over. It's there. And I can't control the future. I mean, I can do things to help move a certain trajectory of my life, but ultimately, I have no control over the future. The only thing I have any real control over is this very moment, and what I do with this very moment. The book of Romans is a very interesting book. First 12 chapters, Paul tells us nothing to do. Gives us some history, tells us who we are, tells us about our brokenness, our belovedness. And then chapter 12, this hinge verse. Let me read that for you. And this is the Message translation. So here's what I want you to do. God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life. Your sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life. Place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you could do for Him. Let me read that a little bit again. Take your everyday, ordinary life. Your sleeping, eating, going to work, walking around life. And place it before God as an offering. That's essentially what we're talking about. Placing the moment, what I have. So let me give you an example of a few ways that I found myself practicing the disciplines. Why is it that when I'm going shopping somewhere, I always look for the best parking space? What is that about? This little game of going up and down. Maybe I'll see someone walking out and I'll follow them. You do realize that if we take the best parking space, that means someone else can't have it. What makes me think I'm any more important? What makes me think my time is of any more value than someone else? So to practice the discipline of service, I gave up all the good parking spaces, parked in the back, walked, offered a prayer to whoever would take that space. Think about the spiritual disciplines as an intentional act that we do before God. It's not about self-help. It's not about doing just activities for the fun of it. It's an activity to lay my life, my everyday ordinary life, before God. And as the other translation would read, as a living sacrifice. So parking spaces. I did this with the airplane. Try this one. Be the last person to get off on an airplane. It's really quite painful to sit there and watch everyone go ahead of me. But it was absolute freedom. And this is the rub. The spiritual disciplines. We may suffer, and we may do things that are uncomfortable. That's okay. We don't need to be afraid to suffer at all. But in the end, it's joy, it's freedom. Being free on the airplane, free to let others pass me by. I'm not any more important than you. You take it. And I take my place at the end. That's a joyful place. It removes me from the rush, the hurry, the panic that I might have ordinarily found myself in. How about the grocery store line? I'm sitting there and I'm frustrated and I'm irritated, and there's this cranky woman ahead. She's so cold. And here I am stuck, waiting for something better to do in my life. Wonderful opportunity to practice a discipline. Because I began to pray in that space. I began to pray for the people in the line. And I began to pray for that cranky lady who was soon to greet me. And I began to see a different picture. I began to see a picture of a woman with a very difficult life and a job that she did not like very much. A woman who endured dehumanizing exchanges with people over and over and over again. Prayer. This hidden gift that we can offer someone. Suddenly, my grocery store experience is not one of frustration, not one of, let me just get out of here so I can get on with real life. But it is real life. And it's an invitation to a life with God. You know, having right beliefs as a Christian is helpful and important, but it's not the end. Doing spiritual practices, these are helpful, they're important. It's not the end. The end is a life with God, a relationship with God. How about a few other ones? I practice the discipline of confession. And you know, we confess our sins before God. That's a good thing to do. And but it's also a good thing to confess our sins one to another. I confess every single thing I've ever done wrong in my life to another person. I made a list. I wrote it out. It hurt. It was painful. Do you know what it felt like to lay that before someone? I mean, you want to use great caution with that. You know, some things you need to take your time with. Some people are not trustworthy with that. But those secrets we hold, those secrets hold lots and lots of power. I think a little bit of our secrets is like taking food and putting it in the basement. It's dark and it's moldy and it grows. It's damp. And soon that food no longer looks like food. It's taken on life all its own. We're only as sick as our secrets, someone once said. The act of confessing to someone else, I cannot tell you how liberating that felt. I cannot tell you how free that felt. It's not that I was necessarily holding anything in, but to lay it all out there, oh, absolutely wonderful and absolute joy. I've since gone on to make that a normal practice, to confess my sins to other people. Sometimes they know I'm doing it, sometimes they don't. I had a friend who asked me to go do something, and I didn't want to do that something, so I very quickly lied to her. Came up with some wonderful excuses why I could not do the thing she was asking me to do. And I went back home that night, and I did what I usually do when I screw up. I'm being really honest. I laughed. I laughed at myself, because there I go again. There's no reason to beat myself up repeatedly. I mean, guilt's good and helpful to alert us to things that need to change, but shame is so destructive. So I laughed. Oh, Nate, there you go. I lay that before God. Look at me. Man, there you go again. Okay, all right. Next day I went up to her. Told her I lied. Made her uncomfortable. It was awkward. She didn't know what to do. Probably should have done that. But you know what it did? It was so helpful for me. Because now when I feel an impulse to lie, they say like 85% of Americans tell at least one lie every single day. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if I got the facts right. But anyway, now when I feel an impulse, knowing that how I'm going to handle that, very, very helpful. Also learn to live a life of integrity, an honest life before God, others, and myself. One of my favorite disciplines has been the discipline of slowing. Really slowing, it to me is born out of solitude. Probably one of the most beneficial disciplines that people today can practice is that of solitude and silence. Our world is so noisy, and we move at a pace that nobody before in the entire human history has lived at. There's a reason we struggle. We're not designed to live at the pace that we live. We're not designed to live with the constant noise that we live with. Taking time to be silent. 5 minutes. Start there. Do it every other day. See where you end up in 6 months. See where you end up in 2 years. We don't need to be heroic with these things. I mean, I'll have this tendency to go, okay, I'm doing this, right? Like, I really got to get my prayer life together, and I'm going to buckle down. And I put it on a date. Maybe I even tell my accountability guy, this is what I'm doing. That's not the answer. The white knuckle club, trying harder. I mean, I don't know. It's a good start. When we enter into the spiritual disciplines as an active response to God's love, I'm loved, I'm accepted, I don't need to earn anything. I don't need to prove anything to God, myself, or other people. I'm loved. Now that's where I start. Then failure is not really failure, but part of the learning experience as I continue to grow in this life with God. There's a freedom that we find when we know who we are. We know our belovedness. At any rate, the discipline of slowing. Do you guys know Sharia? She's a senior. Do you know Sharia? She's a wonderful person, and she walks very slow to class. I'm not making fun of her. She does that intentionally. And I asked her one day, what's up with that? She's like, everybody runs around. I don't feel like I need to. All right. I'm going to try that. Go slow. To walk slow. Eat slow. Talk slow. Wonderful practice. So very helpful. And it's all in a prayerful posture because that compulsion to go, to do more. God, what's going on there? Why am I wanting more? What am I trying to hurry for? These all become so helpful in my growth, in my spiritual life. Fasting is a wonderful discipline. I'm quite a fan. I was really afraid of it. And actually, if you read my book, you'll probably be afraid of it too. Because it got dark. Really dark. And this stuff inside me that I didn't even know was there just came bubbling up. Freaked me out, and I quit the fast. But that's all there. I had other fasts that went really, really well. That one went challenge. There are lots of things we can fast from. We don't need to fast from food. We don't need to stop with that. It's one thing you can do. How about fasting from gossip? How about fasting from talking? How about fasting from talking about ourselves? Take a day. Take one day and don't talk about yourself. How you feel, what you think, what you're experiencing. And when those urges bubble up, pay attention. Wonderful, prayerful exchanges with God. God, I want to talk about myself. Why do you want to talk about yourself, man? Because I want to be important. I want him to like me. Why do you want him to like you? I don't know. This is so helpful. So helpful. can fast from technology. You can take a Sabbath from technology, take a day off, see what you find, see what happens. I did a week fast from technology. Everything I unplugged, anything electronic, I said goodbye to. I absolutely panicked. I'm really serious. It just freaked me out. Like, nobody can get a hold of me. And like, do my balances work? Does everybody know that I'm doing this so they don't think that I'm slacking? Oh, there it is. I don't want to let people down. If I let people down, they might not like me. Oh my gosh, I'm finding my identity in other people. You see, this is wonderful fodder for prayer. I bring that before God, and I smile, and I laugh. These practices really can be quite fun, quite enjoyable, although sometimes painful. Share with you two more. The practice of being irrelevant. What is that? The practice of being irrelevant. See, the disciplines have categories, right? These are really good and helpful places for us to start. But there's all sorts of other spiritual disciplines we can do. Oftentimes the categories bleed one into the other. So I was going to work with this idea of practicing being irrelevant. I cut it off with a Henry Nouwen quote that I'm going to butcher. He says, I'm utterly convinced that the Christian leader of the future will be largely irrelevant and called to offer nothing but their own vulnerable selves. Oh, that sounded really good, actually. Maybe I didn't butcher it. The idea of not trying to be cool, not trying to look good, not trying to impress other people, not trying to put on airs, but being myself, simply myself, my own vulnerable self. So that was a discipline I practiced for a month. And really what it came down to is me going out of my way to not talk about how awesome I am. That's essentially it. Tell you a quick story, how I practiced that one. I was in another state, late at night, riding a bus to a restaurant. Lady on the bus struck up a conversation with me, asked me where I was from. And I told her I was from Michigan, and I worked at Spring Arbor University. Then she began to talk about her adventures and her travels, places she'd been. Well, to be honest with you, I had her beat. I'd been to more places. I knew a lot more than she did. And I began to tell her my experiences. And then it dawned on me, why? Why are you doing that? She just wants you to listen. She doesn't care. Here I am in the middle of the night, some strange city, trying to impress the bus driver with places I've been. What is that about? It was a spiritual discipline. As an intentional act before God, I tuned my attention to be present to this wonderful, beautiful soul and listen to her tell me stories about things I knew myself. And I listened and I smiled. Practicing the discipline of being irrelevant. Really quite fun. Now I have to give a side note, just because it's funny to me. When I was working on doing the discipline of irrelevant, I was interviewed did a thing on the book in this magazine. Can you guess the title of it? Relevant. I thought, oh, this is great. Should I tell them? Should I tell them I'm working on being irrelevant? Oh, they can be relevant. I don't need to be. Let me give you one last story, and then we'll transition to a panel that we have. It's a metaphor for the spiritual life. So I hope you get the idea that there are things for us to do, that we can become people, we can grow, we can change. I fully intend. I want to be like Abba and I want to be that person. I want to be someone who loves others well. I mean, there's a career goal for you. Be someone who loves other people well. So, but we have to start slow. We have to start small. In my 20s, I lived in Colorado and I climbed mountains with my dad. And I had this wonderful experience of climbing these mountains, 14,000-foot mountains, mile and a half up in the air, steep, and you're walking often up this very, very steep hill. The oxygen's thin, and you get out of breath, and your heart races, and the air is so high that the flies go like this. You can catch them with chopsticks. So Dad and I, here we are, going to climb these mountains. I'm young, I'm 20, I'm ready to conquer it. Mountain, I'm taking you down, here we go, right? So I come, and I'm just quick, bam, going up the mountain, and then I do this. Okay, here we go. And then I'm back at it again, right up there. Now here's my dad. He looks at me and he laughs. He says, I'm not doing that. I'm going to walk slow. Okay, you walk slow. And this is about what he did. I kid you not. I said, Dad, you look ridiculous. He said, I don't care. Do what you want. After about an hour and a half up the mountain, guess who was further along? Yeah. With all my painful stops, I was no further up the mountain. My father taught me how to climb mountains. You find a pace that you can live with, and then you just keep going. That's a wonderful metaphor, not just for the spiritual life, but for life in general. See, we would sometimes do this for 12 hours, non-stop. And you know what I found? When you find a pace you can live with, we never needed to stop. I mean, maybe we would stop to get a sandwich out or something, but it wasn't because we were tired. How about you find a pace in life you can live with? How about you learn to say no to things as a spiritual discipline? But this is the road to the well-formed life. This is the road to learning to live our life so that we're naturally able to respond to all the messes that life brings with love and grace. Able to respond as Jesus would if he were to live our lives. We start small, we move slowly, and we just keep going. That's all. Thank you. I brought some really smart people here to help set me straight. So if my panel could. So essentially what I wanted to try to do is unpack some of this a little bit and work with some of this and how it finds itself in our lives. So could you guys introduce yourselves and tell us a little where you come from?
I'm Mojo. I'm in the theology department, and I teach basically spiritual formation in the master's program and other programs.
I'm Jeff Tabone. I'm the resident director of Arbor in Buffett Hall. So I work here on campus and involved with students.
I'm Deb Varland, and I'm getting over that glory that open house center warned you about. I hang out over in the field house, and I teach health and exercise science. I teach wellness, nutrition, cross-cultural studies, Core 200, and once in a while, Core 400.
I'm Jamin Bradley, morning DJ in the morning, and then urban pastor pretty much all the time.
How old is your church?
1208 Greenwood in downtown Jackson.
Mojo, you want to put this on?
Sure. Let me just kind of ask you a question, because you said a couple times, just echo. What's that about? Right? I mean, talking about yourself, you have some awareness. And I'm wondering, because your book is narrative and it's autobiographical, and that goes way back in the history of spiritual writing. And so I'm just wondering, what do you think about in terms of like how much spirituality is about this sense of trying an awareness of God being part of our lives, that we're generally not aware, but then it's, maybe I don't know what they call practicing the presence of God, but it's kind of like, through the disciplines you have these aha moments. How much of spirituality do you think is about that, about perception, about seeing it, and then seeing yourself?
Oh, that's really good. I like that.
And it seems like that's it seems like that's what you're
I guess we grow in awareness of God and others, and we learn to find God in everyday life, all around us. It is, in a sense, a journey of discovery self, discovery of God. Yeah, thanks. It's a good book. I mean, this question, do you agree with that?
Well, one of the things I love about the whole narrative process is that, I don't know, it's just so real. I feel like the way that your book originally was intended was to go on these big journeys around like you're talking about, but when it became everyday life, I feel like myself, when I was reading the book, one of the stories that stood out to me the most was when you're on that bike ride. And then you say, you're talking to your dad, and it's like, Dad, have I been practicing this spiritual discipline of like praying like this whole time, and I just didn't know it? And I don't know if you're like me, it's like, what a relief, because for so long, like, it seems like if there's not some intense worship music in the background, and if you're not in a very sacred place, like, it's not prayer, it doesn't count enough. But in this moment, like, that was relief for me. Like, I'm thinking through my life and the own narrative of what I'm going through. Like Mojo was saying, it's just like, I'm often in the car and I'm just kind of talking with God. And then I'll get home and be like, God, I need to pray more, yeah, you forget what just happened? Like, oh, right, yeah, And like,
I guess that counts, huh?
Yeah, it does count. You're spending your time with them, and it's learning, the idea of doing overly extravagant things as your narrative. Like, I met those people with the wanderlust and all that. They burn out, or they're crazy. One of the big ones. They're just always looking for that new high. But that idea of just every day, what can you do? Going to a shopping center, being last in line, like, that's the real spiritual discipline. You're not looking for your high. If anything, you're looking for a low, is what it seems like. And that's where I think God needs us the most.
Hey, would you share with us Wednesdays? Not talking on Wednesdays. Oh, share your story with that. It's not Wednesday, you can talk.
Yeah. Well, there was a semester, I don't know really exactly how it happened. I decided that I would try to stop talking for a day during the week. I heard that Gandhi had done this, he would talk on Mondays. And so actually when he was scheduled to meet with the British Prime Minister at one point, it was a Monday, and he was in England, but he wouldn't have a meeting. So I was trying to figure out how to do this to be practical. I thought, well, if I do it at home, when I'm at home, it doesn't, and nobody else is home, it doesn't make any difference. So I had to do it at a work day, So I tried to do it on a day when I wasn't teaching. But then, so when I hang a sign on myself saying I'm being silent, and by the way, I'm being holding too, and so I asked my wife, I said, what do I do? And she said, well, what's the point? And I kind of understood all of a sudden. It's like, okay, the point isn't to be, sort of, I'm holier than you, and the point isn't to be, I'm a jerk, so I'm not going to talk to you. And so I decided I would talk as little as I could, which meant not initiating, and probably listening more. And I only did it for a semester, but it was frightening in a lot of ways. It was like one of the most self-revealing experiences I've ever had, because I found myself in meetings thinking I wanted to be funny, and I wasn't gonna be. So it's actually a good thing I didn't say anything anyway. You know? All these things about putting people down and making them stand up and be, looked at or whatever. And it's like all of a sudden I was like, I'm really a jerk. And it was like, gosh, I'm glad I found that out. So anyway, I need to do it again. I think probably every year I do it.
It was fun to watch you do that. Was it Wednesdays?
I think it was Mondays or Wednesdays. Okay.
It was fun to watch you do that.
Yeah, you probably enjoyed me going, hey!
No, but it did something in you. It did something in you. Deb, how do you see the spiritual disciplines and formations playing out in your world?
Sorry, you're going to have to put up with my lack of voice. As I was sitting down here, I thought, I'm going to have to say something when I get up there. And I thought, I really should be thinking about what I'm going to say, which feeds into what you're saying, because then you want to say something impressive or something that's really going to be meaningful, that people can really think about when you're laying in bed tonight. Oh, I remember what Deb Varland said. But I find that as I'm learning, and I'll be honest, one of the biggest corners I turned was that Tom Ball years ago taught a course on contemplative prayer, or listening prayer, and I audited that class, it was a night class, and I thought, how can you possibly sit quietly for 20 minutes in the same room with other people? And it transformed the way that I thought about prayer, because when you do listening prayer, you don't talk. You don't even think thoughts. You sit with God. And you don't receive necessarily, you don't give, you sit. And at least this is my interpretation of it. I'm sorry if I'm butchering what it's supposed to be, but that's been my experience. And I would feel like I was plugging in, and that was all. I wouldn't have revelations, but I felt very calm and very centered, and that was very meaningful to me. And then I could take that sense of calm with me through the mundane, which to borrow a word from Richard Foster, from Nathan's dad, he talks about, most of our lives are lived doing mundane things. Why not have God with us in the mundane? So I think that's at least one thing that's been a learning point for me.
It's interesting, isn't it, how we so often approach prayer as just another noisy activity. And that idea to pray without ceasing, what many of us will have to change our view of prayer if we're going to pray without ceasing. In my mind, prayer is as much listening as anything. It's like a conversation. It's sort of rooted while we just talk, meet with a friend. It's good stuff. Jeff, how about you?
I appreciate how you are articulating in your book the freedom that disciplines bring. And you mentioned what you said earlier. You said, disciplines are important, but it's not the end. And with God. And from my own experience, I grew up in a very fundamentalist church where, disciplines were very rote and purposeful into kind of force relationship and force the holy life. And so it's interesting when you come across disciplines and it's like, going back to the swing of things here, and it's very heavy, very legalistic. But I appreciate how Nate's able to articulate, no, the disciplines are about freedom. It is growing deeper into that relationship with Christ. Being able to, being at a place where you're able to more freely receive His love for us, rather than us, beating our head against the wall. Because that's really what disciplines could be if we didn't enter it with the right heart. But maybe going off that, Nate, if it's okay, a question for you. As you talked about, the guilt sometimes we get, you just don't get it right. Or you talk about shame being destructive. What do you do on the days where it's just harder to laugh it off? That you messed up, or that you're not complete, or that. You know what I mean?
No, I don't ever have those days.
I don't know, what do you got? I'll think about it. What do you want?
I asked a question.
Yeah, oh, please.
I was just gonna sing a song.
You know, I find those days don't come very often anymore. I used to have this idea that, man, if I messed up, then, you know, I had to really get stuff straight before I could approach God. And, you know, I got to make sure I'm, you know, reading a few chapters or, you know, got the praise music or, you know, some nonsense before then He received me. I just go straight in there, and here I am. I don't know. I don't hang there. I just go with it. I don't stay there very often. Usually, if I do, it's because I'm tired. I just need to go to bed. And my head's just running nonsense. I don't know. What do you got?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. I think it's probably different for us, like what you're saying, you used to. We're in different places, and it's really hard to let go of that. So I think we talked this afternoon. They talked about narratives, and a lot of the narratives that we get from our parents and from our church traditions and all. And it's really hard to get those cycles out of our head. And I think sometimes we just end up reacting. Right? I mean, this is the way. I mean, like I think about. The way I get angry sometimes, let's just say at my dog to make it safe. You know, it's just like we're on the soccer field, sorry, but it's just, you know, it's just instant. And I'm like, where did that come from? You know, and I know it's probably buried way back in my childhood.
Hey, Jamin, how do you see formation play itself out in the local church?
I think one of the spiritual formations that the church is needing so badly right now is just general confession. I think that's another one of the chapters that you wrote on that really stood out to me, because you're reading from, you know, respected author and teacher talking about what he's been through, and the things that he's had to confess and talk through, and one of the moments in the book you're just talking about, like,
Easy now.
and, well, one of the ones in the book, you wrote this is on you. You're talking about like confessing all this stuff to your sponsor, I think it was.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's just like, you're forgiven.
Yeah.
And he said a tear rolled down at you. If there's anything that will help the church, the local church, finally really move into what they're looking to do, I think it's partially just confession. I think people are starving themselves of moving forward in spiritual disciplines because they are so caught up in the guilt. They are so caught up in the shame. I remember meeting with Nate one day, and as a certified addictions counselor, you're addicted to shame, Jamin. That's not a thing, Nate, you know? That's impossible. And then over time, I just realized, like, every time I find myself in that moment, I'm not going to laugh at myself. That's ridiculous. You are so messed up. What is wrong with you? You know, I get down on myself more and more. But as I've learned to turn to accountability, as I learned to turn to accountable groups and frequent texts to multiple people throughout the day who know me and know me well, that's where I found like the real Jamin hiding. And I think when I look at church, the place that I found that is most real, that is most passionate and happening is in things like Celebrate Recovery, which is, you know, the place, it's like the Christian AA, if you will, where Jesus is just acknowledged as the higher power, and it's got some more acronyms in it, because that's what we do as a church when we take things, we put acronyms in. But when I'm there, amidst those people, I have heard every testimony ever, you know? And it's always the same, sex, drugs, rock and roll. But I've never heard somebody get up on the stage and go into great detail about everything that they've done and how they've cheated multiple times and this and that. But that's in the church, you know? And And once that starts happening, you just see like people in the room, like, everybody's humbled. If this person can come around, maybe I can say the things that are going on in my life. And so with spiritual disciplines, like, I think that's one of the greatest ones that we're lacking right now. We all try to pretend like we have it together. The truth is, all of us, even though the pastors, we're trying to still figure it out. If we could be more transparent, we might be able to get beyond to some of the harder disciplines. Because confession, I mean, that's pretty hard. That'll kickstart it pretty quick.
Hey Jeff, what do you, in your life, what practices have you found helpful? You're just like a really peaceful guy.
You know, I actually find what's helpful for me, I'm very interested and a lot of my work involves meeting with people, being around people all the time, which I love, and that's exciting, but it's more taking than giving. So kind of the last couple of years, I've just been incorporating a lot more physical discipline in my life, so biking, running, or swimming. And what that accomplishes, that's just time by myself, especially in the pool, like no one can talk to you while I'm doing that, you know. And I find that to be, especially once you kind of get you find your pace, kind of what Nate was talking about earlier, you find your pace, and then you're kind of able to zone in on some the things that are, you begin to pull the cobwebs away of just kind of the things that are kind of hidden, that you weren't ever aware that were going on in your mind or your heart. And then, no, that's no problem, okay. What about that? You know, and then I find myself like praying for things like that. Yeah, so I'm gonna brag about Kevin. Kevin's over there. Kevin's great. He's usually in the lane next to me while he's swimming. He has a bunch of memory verses in plastic right on the edge of the pool. So like in between laps and stuff, he takes it, reads it, and it's off, speeding along again. And I think like that's a great way where, Kevin doesn't have to be sitting in a room by himself, reading, memorizing scripture. It's great to incorporate that into normal, everyday, average, mundane piece of life, swimming laps in the pool. So Kevin inspires me.
All right.
And I would say that seriously.
No, I love it. I mean, it's just a very simple, easy thing to do. And the other thing I like about it is it's hidden, except from you, but well, how do we do? Anything else we want to talk about?
I just want to mention something. Just want to mention that as I'm sitting here thinking about personal application for all of this, I think the toughest place for me to practice disciplines is in my own home and with my family. And this very personal challenge, especially confession. I do confess to them, probably too much. but I think our youngest sons now are almost 14, 12 and a half, and they're old enough to be able to listen, and to be able to receive, and to be able to watch me struggle, trying to be a parent and trying to follow Christ. And I think that there's a place for that. Not every day. I mean, if I started confessing every day, I think they'd be messed up. But I think those that we're closest with, it's easy to confess something we see occasionally. But I think within our own families and within our own small groups, those that we fellowship with most closely, it's a good reason we want to say.
Yeah, I mean, home really, it's those that know us well, that's really where the road meets the road in a sense. Lots of good challenges at home for that. Hey, Mojo, would you share a little bit about the master's program?
So, Eric is the director of the Masters of Spiritual Formation and Leadership, Eric Magnuson, and he teaches on campus. But it's a 2-year master's program, 9 classes online, take 1 class at a time, 3 residencies. 2 of them are in the United States, someplace, adult place like Malibu or something like that. And then the third Guatemala. We have, how many graduates of the master's program do we have here? Okay, so, actually, let's give them a welcome. It's a program that's cohort-based, so you go through all 2 years with the same group of people. And I just remember one comment from a student early on. She said, I finally found a safe place to share my soul. And I think that says a lot. It's a beautiful experience. We didn't really realize it was going to be as effective as it has been. And how many years have we been in the program there? Started, yeah, about ready to start in a year or so. Sponsored and actually modeled after Nathan's dad, Richard Foster's Renovare streams, and Richard Foster helped us start the program, and he's always been backing us. So it's a great program. Mm-hmm. And then the minor, right?
Yeah. So we're starting a minor, the spiritual formation, and this is cool. It's essentially 7 classes, and I don't know what I want to say about it. Well, if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And we have some flyers about the minor and also about MSFL, the master's program. But I think that the minor, I think people would find very helpful, those who are going into helping professions, those who are going into ministry, to give you some very, very simple but tangible tools to help transformation in your own life, but then also people that you would be working with.
I think it'll also be really, really helpful for anybody who wants to be human.
Oh, we'll have none of that. The other thing I'd add is that just starting it, if you want to take some of the classes and don't want to commit to being a minor, that's perfectly fine. We'd love to have you, or even audited classes. So. The other thing, Mojo's got a really cool book sitting over there. I bet it'd be cool to sign some if people want. Great. Yeah, and me too. I'll be happy to sign some books. But thank you all for being here.
Let me pray. Father, would you bring a holy gaiety to our lives? Bring joy. May our suffering be good. Invite us on a journey with you. Rip through our self-centeredness and our pride. Would you speak to each of us? Give us simple, ordinary ways that we might lay our lives before you.